Let's face it, in our busy lives, we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. In fact, according to the CDC, only 1 in 10 Americans are eating the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables each day, missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, fibers, and antioxidants. And that's where Balance in Nature comes in. Balance in Nature sources only the best produce, free from pesticides, heavy metals, and harmful bacteria. And Balance in Nature is the best fruit and vegetable product on the market. They use only fresh, whole fruits and vegetables inside each capsule. They don't use any GMOs, fillers, binding agents, or preservatives of any kind. You're getting real food, real science, real nutrition. I would never endorse a product that I don't use myself, and since using Balance in Nature, I feel more alert, I have more energy, my focus is sharper, and I feel great. Live life to the fullest and choose Balance in Nature. And guess what? P.A.S. Report listeners can get 35% off the first preferred order. Start getting the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables you need by using code PAS at balanceofnature.com.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and I'll tell you, man, thank goodness for CNN. Had it not been for them, I would have never have known that I got a $100 a month raise because of gas prices. And here I was thinking how much money I'm losing every month for the increased cost of food, gas, and just about everything else. It's funny how gas prices were at $2.39 per gallon when President Biden took office, and the current national average is still $3.90 per gallon. It appears that CNN likes to use CRT math because that doesn't tell me that I've gotten a $100 a month raise. It tells me that I'm spending a hell of a lot more money today in August 2022 than I was in January of 2021 when President Biden took office. And then you have the Energy Secretary, Jennifer Granholm, touting that because of the Inflation Reduction Act, middle-class Americans can lower their energy costs by installing solar panels and get a 30% off in federal rebates and subsidies. Just when you thought the ruling elite couldn't be any more out of touch, they managed to find a way to show how they have little in common with the plight of ordinary people. I don't know about you, but I really can't afford to just go out there and purchase an electric vehicle. I can't afford to just go out there and get solar panels on my home. They make it as if these things are just so simple and cheap. Not only are your tax dollars being used to finance these subsidies, not only do they continue to push us further into debt, the only people that actually benefit from these programs are the ones that don't need any subsidies, the ones that could already afford to make these purchases. These people are nuts. In any event, I don't want to harp on them too long, because I want to touch on two things in this episode. I briefly want to talk about the lack of trust in our institutions, and I want to talk about the red wave or the potential lack of a red wave in the midterm elections, because that's what we're hearing right now. You know, everything going on, you would think that people would be more outraged, given how difficult our lives have become. You would think that those responsible for the current conditions wouldn't stand a chance this coming November. You would think that the Republicans would be able to capitalize on the growing dissatisfaction. But that's not what appears to be happening. There are many questions as to whether a red wave will occur in November or if the red wave has already fizzled out before it even began. And I'm going to get into that. I'm going to explore that, because is that true? Before I do, make sure you go to PASreport.com. Sign up for the newsletter there. Also, click the follow button on this podcast so that you never miss an episode. So getting to today's episode, over the last few weeks, I've highlighted the corruption within our institutions, explaining the abuses of power within the bureaucracy. I also just published a piece in the Federalist pointing out several examples of how our institutions have forfeited our trust, and I encourage you to read it. I have the link up at the PAS Report website, so check it out. But the FBI raid on Mar-a-Lago was simply the culmination of 2 decades where the abuses of power have gotten progressively worse. And just so everyone's aware, we're now hearing reports that the White House was informed in some way about this whole incident with President Trump when he left office, and the documents and the FBI raid that took place. Now, I told you that there's no possible way that nobody at the White House was informed of what was going on. It just wasn't possible, and that turns out that I was right. And it's not like I'm a genius, it's just common sense. Something with this much political blowback, you are going to inform the White House. In any event, much of what we are witnessing started with the Patriot Act, where the tools developed to target foreign terrorist organizations quickly morphed into a mass monitoring program where all of our electronic data was being captured under the NSA's PRISM program. You have John Brennan and James Clapper openly deny that the government was capturing our data. They were lying directly to Congress, and they were never held accountable. They were never charged with perjury, and not a single person who authorized this program was ever held accountable for this direct assault on our Fourth Amendment. You have journalists who were routinely spied on over the course of the last 5 administrations and no accountability. We saw the ideological abuses at the IRS with the targeting of Tea Party groups and no accountability. You had Lois Lerner and Eric Holder charged with contempt of Congress, but they never got the Steve Bannon treatment. No accountability. John Brennan, CIA, spied on sitting members of the United States Senate Intelligence Committee. And while members of the Senate feigned their outrage, they never held a single person or the agency accountable for the clear abuse of power. We're all familiar with how they protected Hillary Clinton, her illegal use of a private server, and I'm not going to get into the litany of double standards that exist here. In any event, it follows a similar theme, that nobody was held accountable. We're well aware of the abuses when it comes to the FBI's Russian collusion hoax investigation, when they're lying to the FISA court, manipulating evidence. Again, no real accountability took place there. Time and time again, officials would leak classified information to the press. They were never held accountable. You have the United States Postal Service ICOP program, where its own inspector general stated that the program was largely illegal. No accountability there. And then you have the FBI illegally accessing the NSA's repository on Americans on several occasions. Nobody's ever held accountable there. We know that multiple intelligence agencies and federal law enforcement agencies continue to monitor and collect the data of American citizens, including the FBI, the CIA, and ICE. We know the ATF has amassed millions of records on legal firearm owners, even though a gun database is strictly prohibited by Congress. No accountability there. We know the Secret Service tried to protect Hunter Biden and his illegal gun crimes. No accountability there. We know that the FBI served as President Biden's personal police force, tracking down Ashley Biden's diary. You have the Department of Education, the National School Board Association, and the Department of Justice colluding and labeling parents as domestic terrorists, yet no accountability. We all witnessed repeated lies from the CDC and other public health institutions throughout the pandemic, from if you get the vaccine, you can't get COVID, to masking and keeping our kids out of school for over a year, even though they knew these cloth masks didn't do a damn thing. Even worse, we have Fauci's emails showing how ruthless he actually is by targeting any scientist or medical professional that disagreed with him in an attempt to destroy their credibility. And while thank goodness he's retiring, he should be prosecuted for his lies to Congress when it comes to gain-of-function research and how he used government resources to target any scientists who disagreed with him, like the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration. He needs to be held accountable, but he probably won't. See, the abuses are glaringly obvious, and I didn't even touch on all of them. These are the ones that I could think of off the top of my head. And rather than take responsibility and hold officials accountable, instead the ruling elite does the opposite. Not only do they take zero responsibility for their actions, but they attack and demonize anyone who dares to criticize them. You're not allowed to criticize them. They've made it abundantly clear. The problem isn't with the government or its institutions. The problem isn't the abuses of power. The problem is with you for complaining about it. If you listen to the officials and the media outlets, those that criticize the government and its institutions are deemed as potential extremists. Just listen to what they're saying. You're not allowed to question the integrity of our officials. Who the hell do you think you are? Asking questions, criticizing the government. And they say because of all the criticism that the threats against these agencies and departments are at all-time highs. Now, anyone that threatens any type of violence against any person or entity is a moron. Let's just say it loudly and clearly. There is no need for that. And there are numerous criminal statutes to deal with actual threats of violence. But this goes beyond that. Just because you have a handful of morons out there that have very little self-control, it doesn't mean the rest of us should sit down and shut up. These abuses illustrate why it's always important to be skeptical of the government and our institutions. It's reasons like this that show exactly why we should not just blindly and obediently trust these institutions and their policies. Too many of our officials are trying to justify their abuses, and they do it with a sense of righteousness, that as long as they qualify their wrongdoing with the sentiment of preserving democracy, that it's okay, that it's acceptable, and that the problem lies with you. See, in their delusional minds, they believe that they are the guardians of democracy, and then they get to do whatever the hell they want, consequences be damned. Thomas Jefferson once warned us, quote, "The time to guard against corruption and tyranny is before they shall have gotten hold of us," end quote, not after. We have to call out these abuses of power when we see them. And one of the main reasons we got to this moment is because the American people have been far too silent, far too complacent, and far too trustworthy when it comes to the government. To me, that's the far more startling thing. When we look around and we look at everything that's going on, we look at how our lives have gotten so much more difficult. You have millions of American families struggling financially. You can't walk down the street of any major urban area without fear of being accosted or a fear of violence. Crime is out of control. You got parents being shut out of what their children are learning in the schools. Given everything that we've witnessed over the last 2 years, including the weaponization of our institutions, one would think that Republicans should be able to capitalize on the dissatisfaction that does exist. There's no way that the majority of people support these types of policies. There's no way that people like to pay more for energy or food. There's no way that people don't want to feel safe in their communities. The reality is that on every major policy issue, Democrat leadership and Democrat policies have failed. It's why so many said that a red wave appears all but likely this November. But in recent weeks, the narrative has changed. There is no longer this optimism about a red wave. Many of the pundits, they changed their tune, and they're now saying that a red wave is unlikely. Even Republican leaders are starting to be less optimistic about a red wave and have resigned themselves to the fact that while Republicans essentially are going to take the House, I have zero doubt about that, the Senate becomes a much different story. You now have many who believe the Senate is an uphill battle and Democrats are likely to retain control. Are you kidding me? After 2 years of the failures we've seen, that Democrats should be retaining control of the United States Senate? So what exactly is going on here? Why haven't the Republicans been able to take advantage? Forget the idea of the red wave. Given everything that's happened over the last couple of years, it should be a red tsunami, not a red wave. And I'm not saying that the Republican Party is much better. They're not. They're just the lesser of two evils. So Republicans can be just as inept and incompetent. And are Republicans that inept and incompetent that they can't even take advantage of the Biden administration and the Democrats' failures? Or maybe we're misreading the American people. Maybe the majority of the Americans support this Democrat agenda. Maybe the American people have just simply given up, have decided, you know what, it's all rigged anyway, so they're just living their lives. Maybe they've resigned themselves to the fact that this is the new normal here. Maybe it's the polling. Is the polling accurate? Can the polls be trusted? These are just some of the questions that we should be asking because nothing makes much sense. What I mean is that elections, they're largely predictable, or at least historically they used to be. During midterm elections, the party that controls the White House usually suffers in the election cycle, in the midterm elections. Throughout the last 100 years, there have only been 2 exceptions to this rule. You have FDR in the 1930s, and you have George W. Bush in 2002 following the 9/11 attacks. Then if you factor in a bad economy, it's usually devastating for the party in power because they ultimately bear the responsibility for the current conditions within the United States. Add in crime and the party in power should get a shellacking. But that's not what appears to be happening. Headline after headline is now saying Democrat losses are going to be limited, that Republicans are blowing their chances of a red wave. And this is where we see Republicans repeatedly fall for the same nonsense over and over again. I said it months ago. Don't ever assume that Republicans are good at politics. They're not. They could blow the best chances they have very easily. They constantly do it. You can hand them election. They'll find a way to screw it up. Trust me, that's how dumb some of these people are. They allow the media to drive a narrative, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy. Republicans never challenge the media narrative. Just watch them. Instead, they delude themselves into thinking that Either no one pays attention to the media anymore and the media is out of touch with ordinary Americans, or they delude themselves into thinking that the media, the legacy media, is the same as it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, where they're going to get a fair shake, and they're not. While the media may be out of touch, they still maintain an enormous amount of influence on how we think and the way we perceive the issues that impact us daily, and Republicans have no room for error. You know, anytime a Republican says something dumb, which is quite often, by the way, you're going to have the media amplify it. And they're going to try and make it as if that's all Republicans. Unfortunately, all too often, Republicans will allow the media to set the agenda, and they never challenge the narratives flowing out of the newsrooms. Rarely do they go on these programs and push back against the hosts who simply regurgitate the Biden administration's talking points. You have literally half the Republican Party that still hasn't woken up to the realization that there aren't real journalists that exist anymore, that they're all political activists. And they're all looking to push a political agenda. Just look at the ridiculous piece from CNN that I brought up at the beginning of the episode, where they pronounced that Americans got a $100 a month raise because of the falling gas prices. Well, what about the Biden administration cutting the deficit? You still have people out there pushing this idea that President Biden has cut, over $1 trillion off our deficit. No, when you spend emergency money, trillions of dollars in COVID emergency monies, and then you don't spend that the next month or the next year, that's not a reduction in deficit. But yet they get to spin it whatever way they want because the media backs them up. Well, what about the things that the networks don't cover, the mainstream media outlets? They continue to ignore the surge in crime in every major urban center. I mean, you literally go on social media day after day. And what do you see? You see random attacks of violence on ordinary citizens who are just minding their own business. Maybe they're walking to work, taking the subway, whatever it may be. And they're just getting punched in the face from behind, getting knocked out, brutally assaulted, stabbed. And you have all these media outlets not covering this crime that has become a real epidemic in the urban centers. They don't report how these urban areas are becoming uninhabitable. They don't report that, where innocent Americans have to live in their homes like prisoners because of the violence that's occurring. The media outlets totally ignore what's going on the border, or the fact that several dozen potential terrorists have crossed our border. They were on the terrorist watch list, and they've been able to successfully get into this country because we don't have a southern border. But you're not going to hear that. On any given day, what are you going to hear? Well, you're going to hear endless segments about the abortion debate. So they won't show you any images from the southern border, but you're going to be force-fed this constant narrative when it comes to abortion. There's no doubt that the Democrat strategy is working to a certain degree because the media is all too happy to push their agenda. They want the abortion debate front and center as we head into the midterms because they see the polling. Before the abortion ruling, and all you have to do is open your eyes, before the abortion ruling, Republicans were leading on just about every generic poll. Republicans were leading in just about every key race. Since the Supreme Court decision, the polling has changed as Democrats and their media allies continue to push false narratives, making it as if abortion is illegal in most states. They keep pushing the idea that interracial marriage and gay marriage, they're up next for Republicans. And the Republicans, they continue to remain silent or they play defense. Again, they fall for it every time because they're not smart. They allow their political opponents to define them rather than they define themselves. Like, why are the Republicans even talking about abortion? The word abortion should not be coming out of the Republicans' mouths right now. The fact is that Republicans shouldn't be on playing defense. If they're asked a question about abortion, they should force Democrats and the media, because those are the political activists, the DNC spokespeople, they should push them to answer the question on how far left, how the Democrat Party has morphed from where the American people are, where the Democrat positions have changed. Used to be abortion was safe, legal, and rare, and that's how they wanted it to be. Now it's abortion on demand, anytime, any place, anywhere. But more importantly, this shouldn't even be at the forefront of issues we face. And this is why Republicans need to be quiet when it comes to abortion. They should focus on 4 key issues in every speech, in every single appearance. Every time they go out and they're speaking, they should be talking about the surge in crime and the unsafe streets. They should be talking about the surge in prices and how millions of American families are facing economic devastation. They should be focusing on the Biden administration's complete failure to control the southern border and the unending stream of illegal immigrants. They should be focusing on parent choice when it comes to education, how Democrats want to exclude parents from what their children are learning in schools. These are the 4 key issues in this election cycle, and no Republican should deviate from these issues. If you want to throw in a 5th issue, it could be about the clear abuses of power within our institutions and how we rein in these unaccountable government agencies and departments. We've all been there before. You want to get someone the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, but you have no idea what to get. Well, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. Gift baskets are perfect for any occasion, whether it's birthdays, holidays, corporate events, or a simple thank you. At designeryourselfgiftbaskets.com, you get to choose the theme and the products that go into the basket. You have a coffee lover? Try the K-Cup basket. You're looking for something special for the person that loves to barbecue? No problem. There's a basket for it. Make every basket unique to the person you're sending it to. And if you're in a rush and don't have time to customize the gift basket, it's not an issue, because at DIYGB.com, you can choose from hundreds of pre-arranged baskets based on the occasion, theme, or recipient. And P.A.S. Report listeners get 10% off using code P.A.S. at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift for the perfect occasion, and use coupon code P.A.S. at checkout to get 10% off your order. Visit DIYGB.com today. Republicans should not be going off message. Democrats will love nothing more than to keep the debate centered on the other issues, to keep the American people's minds off the misery and the failures that this administration has created in the Democrat Party. So when someone in the media asks a Republican about abortion, the Republican should immediately pivot to one of these key issues, especially the surging inflation or the surging crime. Just say, hey, I know you want to focus on abortion, but the truth is crime impacts a hell of a lot more people. Most people will never get an abortion, but when an American can't walk down the street out of fear of being attacked, or when stores have to close because of rampant looting, this affects all Americans. When Americans are witnessing their economic livelihoods being destroyed, having to make tough choices like what bills they could afford to pay and which ones they can't, that's what we need to talk about. That's what the American people want to hear about. These are the issues that Republicans should be talking about in every campaign speech they give. Take Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania. He's not a particularly good candidate, and the people he's surrounded with themselves aren't all that great. But there is no reason that he shouldn't be leading his race. He should be pointing out how murders are skyrocketing throughout the state. He should point out the economic devastation the state faces because of the Democrats' war on natural gas, and how this is negatively impacting the personal economies of millions of families in Pennsylvania. The arguments are simple and should be framed in a simple way. Do you want to pay more for food and energy or less? Do you want more crime or less? Do you want more illegal immigration or less? Should parents have more say in what their children are learning or less? These are the questions that the candidates should be putting out to the voters. Stop going down the rabbit holes. The name of the game is to bring in new voters, to get support from independents and disaffected Democrats. And the reality is a crappy economy and surging crime affects everyone. It doesn't matter what your political beliefs are. The base is already shored up, so you don't have to play to the bases. The more time a candidate spends talking about other issues, the more time they are wasting on voters that are already likely to vote for them anyway. You win elections by speaking the language of ordinary people and empathizing with their struggles. That's how you win elections. It's not rocket science. Every single Republican ad should be focusing on these issues. Juxtapose images of the ruling elite talking about bail reform and defunding the police against videos of innocent Americans being brutally assaulted for no reason, and then people getting let out of those prisons after those brutal assaults. Juxtapose the images of stores being raided and looted with impunity as the Democrats are talking about defunding the police and bail reform. Juxtapose clips of Energy Secretary Granholm and the Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg talking about how Americans have to feel pain at the pump to move toward green energy versus images of people waiting in line at soup kitchens. Juxtapose images of the ruling class, the ruling elite building walls around their compounds like President Biden against images of the endless flow of migrants crossing the border each and every day. These are the campaign ads that should be airing throughout America, but they're not. Sure, some ads like this may be airing out there, but not nearly enough. Any Republican campaign manager not putting out these types of ads should be fired immediately. Because here's the problem that Republicans created. One thing that Republicans have done successfully is highlight the failures of this administration. And President Biden's poll numbers reflect that. They're in the tank. And even Democrats don't want to see President Biden run for re-election. But while the Republicans have been successful in tying the people's dissatisfaction to the Biden administration, they fail to tie these policies, these failures, to the entire Democrat Party and the Democrat Party platform. And this is a huge mistake. While President Biden may be the face of the Democrat Party, Republicans need to show that President Biden is simply implementing the Democrat agenda, that these aren't President Biden's ideas, that these are the Democrats' ideas. They need to show that it's the Democrat agenda crushing the American people. And Biden is nothing more than a vessel pushing through that agenda. If you simply make it about President Biden, then sure, he's going to lose support. But if you show the American people that Biden is simply pushing the Democrat agenda, then the entire Democrat Party will lose support. Every Democratic candidate will have to go on the defensive. And then you box them into a corner. That's good politics. Either they have to defend the Democrat agenda and thereby show that they are out of touch with the American people, or the Democrat candidate is going to have to speak out against the Democrat agenda, acknowledging that it's a failure. So it's a win-win situation for Republicans if they put Democrats in those positions, but they're not smart enough to do that. Another failure that the Republicans have is that just being against something isn't enough to win an election. You need to stand for something. You need to provide solutions to the problems people are facing. This is where Republicans do a very poor job. They don't articulate where they stand on the issues, and they don't provide solutions that are relatively easy for people to understand. I am constantly hearing talk from Republicans that once they get the majority, that they're going to launch all these investigations into the Biden administration and some of the institutional corruption that exists. Now, that's great and all. I applaud that. I want to see some of that. But that's not solving the problems Americans currently face. And that messaging isn't going to win over any new voters. Granted, you're going to make people that already support you happy that you're going to do that, but you're not winning over voters. The fact is, Americans don't want to hear about endless hearings and investigations that have little impact on their lives. It's important to highlight the corruption within the institutions. I talk about it all the time. It's important to hold any official that abuses their power accountable for their actions and policies. But these are the things that play to their base. We've seen time and time again, endless hearings on endless topics. Nobody's ever held accountable. So Americans don't just want to hear that you're going to be doing hearings. Americans want messages of optimism. They want a message that rises above the routine political divisions. The Republican Party should issue a one-page fact sheet on what legislation they intend to introduce and how that legislation solves a problem in ordinary Americans' lives. Because if we are to believe the polls, it should serve as a warning to every single Republican. And it's not to say that the polling is accurate. I have a big problem. There are many problems I see within the polling that simply doesn't make sense. From oversampling Democrats, from only targeting certain areas, to just the polls. I mean, just take how every poll is showing Hispanics gravitating toward the Republican Party in a big way. We've also seen movement within the black community away from the Democrats. If that's the case, and Republicans are outperforming with Hispanics and blacks, it doesn't make sense that Republicans would be losing in the generic balloting. That doesn't make any sense to me. So what exactly is going on here? And that's why I say that you can't necessarily trust the polls. However, even if the polling is wrong, Republicans shouldn't be comfortable at all. That shouldn't make up for it. I mean, don't forget, they need to fight as if they're 10 points down. They need to fight and make sure that their turnout is a lot higher than they anticipate to make up for all the shenanigans. You have a lot of dissatisfaction out there. And if Republicans can't capitalize on the current political environment, they don't deserve to win. If a red wave doesn't happen, it will be a political disaster for the Republican Party and the Republican leadership. And if a red wave doesn't happen, then every single person in the Republican leadership position should resign immediately following the election. And I'm talking about people like Kevin McCarthy, Mitch McConnell, Ronna McDaniel, every state GOP leader, every county GOP leader, every town GOP leader. This election cycle should be a layup. The issues are clear, the lines are clear, and there are no excuses for failure. Unfortunately, the Republicans are better at fighting amongst themselves rather than fighting against the Democrat agenda. Unfortunately, Republicans go harder against each other than they do against their Democrat opponents. If Republicans were smart, which many are not, they would stick to the messaging I outlined in this episode, especially now that the primaries are coming to an end. And if your candidate lost, get over it. Enough with the infighting. We need leadership, and if the Republicans blow the red wave, then they don't deserve to lead. The situation's dire, especially in states like New York. If Republicans can't show the failures of a unified Democrat government and the defects, because there's not a single person that's satisfied in New York, if Republicans can't start making gains, that's on them. That's a failure of their leadership. That's a failure to communicate effectively with the people themselves. So I hope you found the content in this episode informative. That's why I hope and encourage you, share it with others. We have to get our message out there. Don't forget to give the P.A.S. Report a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. Take 30 seconds to write a review. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.